Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of Healing the Spirit. I am so excited that you're here, and I'm beyond honored that you are tuning into this podcast and this conversation. This is a really special conversation that I had with a friend, a teacher, someone I admire deeply within the community. It's none other than Jeff Hinshaw. You may know Jeff from Jeff's podcast, Cosmic Cousins, which in many ways, at least for me, really paved the way of, in this community of spiritual practitioners, astrologers, tarot readers. I think Jeff is truly a unique voice. Jeff shows up with so much heart, so much integrity, and really balances this intellectual curiosity and an honoring of our wholeness as a human being and the ways that we live in a body, the ways that we have emotions, the ways that we have spirit. I think Jeff really has a way to gently invite us to really honor all parts of us. And I think that what's so unique about Jeff and Jeff's offering and Jeff's presence is that they really embody all of these qualities, that it's not just through the verbal transmissions, which are brilliant, but also through the energy that Jeff is showing up in. And that's truly special. So it feels so... I feel so honored to be in Jeff's presence and to be sharing this conversation with you. When I tuned in to this conversation and what wanted to be spoken, what wanted to be said, discussed in the space between me and Jeff, I was really feeling the energy of Virgo and Pisces. And so I thought it would be fun for the two of us to talk about the idea of devotion. And what I think is really cool about this conversation is that, yes, we spoke to the idea of devotion, but it also is not limited to the Virgo kind of devotion. We also had an expansive conversation around Scorpio and Sagittarius. We spoke about religious trauma. We spoke about how astrology and tarot provide pathways for people who may feel like they are not fully accepted as their whole selves in the religion or the spiritual background that they came from. We spoke about Jupiter and Saturn, how Jeff has been spending this year of Jupiter in Pisces, which will be coming to an end soon for all of us. We spoke about how Saturn has been transiting through Jeff's first house because Jeff is an Aquarius rising. And of course, we spoke about the archetype, the energy of Vesta, which, if we want to talk about devotion, it's not going to be a complete conversation without Vesta. So let me introduce you to Jeff by way of their bio. Jeff Hinshaw is an intuitive practitioner fusing together over a decade of experience working with tarot, astrology, and somatic healing. Jeff's practice is grounded in reverence for the elements, nature, the earth, and spirit. Jeff offers their unique expertise of ritual, tarot, and astrology to guide others on journeys of self-exploration, transformation, and healing. Jeff is the host of the podcast Cosmic Cousins. Released on the new and full moon, each episode facilitates a deeper connection to the moon and the current astrological transits. Jeff is also the founder of the Brooklyn Fools Tarot Journey, a 22-week ritual gathering through the major arcana of the tarot. Dubbed as Radical Tarot School by National Geographic, the Brooklyn Fools Tarot Journey has been an active tarot community since 2014. Jeff's teachings of the tarot go hand in hand with their astrological practice. Jeff is also passionate about upgrading archetypes to facilitate collective intention. Jeff has achieved this through community projects like Zodiac Queens, as well as authoring the book Aries, published through Sterling Publishing House. In addition, Jeff identifies as gay, non-binary, and queer, and has experience working with many LGBTQIA+ related issues. Jeff is located in the Pacific Northwest, the traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Wasco, and Cowlitz tribes. All right, I'm excited to get you into this conversation. So here's my conversation with Jeff Hinshaw. Welcome to the podcast, Jeff. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you.
This has been such a dream, honestly, to have you. I don't even remember how you and I met. I believe that maybe it's through Britton LaRue, who once told me about your work and spoke glowingly about your work. And then I have just remembered, like, following your work for the longest time through your podcast. And then I believe I started signing up for some of your classes. We had a reading. I was on your podcast. So it feels like we've kind of been cousins for some time, although maybe we haven't had that much one-on-one time. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that you're saying cousins, because that's like a nod to my offering, Cosmic Cousins.
Exactly.
Which is, that name came from, I don't have any cousins. I have a really small family, and I don't have the ability to really connect with my family through any kind of spiritual practice. And so that was kind of a call out to the community and to the universe to connect with other like-minded people.
Yeah.
Use these cosmic tools to make sense of their life and to connect them to their heart, their devotion.
I love that. I love that. I also feel like your offerings have this way of really gently inviting people back to themselves, but also there's a way in which you speak in your podcast or in your offerings that always makes me feel like I'm part of a larger community, even though I don't see those people. So
Yeah. Thanks for saying that. And before we started the call, I asked you where you were recording, and you said you're in like the living area of where the place that you live, and I'm in my living room too. And I just, even though we are on opposite sides of this country, we have this opportunity to sit, and I'm feeling like we're in a living room together, having tea, and I feel connected to you. We talked about a year ago. I had you and Jordan on the podcast.
That's true. That was for Libra seasons. That was almost exact. That's a year plus ago.
That's right. Yeah. And we listened to some of your music.
Yeah, that's right. So I always like to begin my conversations with this question of, who do you feel, sense, or know yourself to be in this present moment?
There's been a relearning of that and a reevaluation of that over this past year, as the transit that I'm connecting it to is Jupiter and Pisces, and entering Jupiter in Aries and then going back into Jupiter in Pisces. So there's this expanse around all of the accrued wisdom that we've gained over the last 12 to 13 years, while at the same time feeling on the threshold of new beginnings. And I'm giving myself permission these last 2 months of 2022 to be in that Jupiter and Pisces energy of reflecting on it all and what the past 12 years have meant to me. And so I'm not in the I am of Aries quite yet. So when you ask that question, I'm allowing myself to be messy. I'm allowing myself to be in the unknown of who I am. And I think part of that, I started this year while Jupiter was in Pisces, of gifting myself extra space to be in that unknown, whether it was through me taking a break from social media for most of the year, not holding space for groups as a teacher, switching more to one-on-one work so I could really be in that space of connecting to spirit and to the unknown and to what wants to come through. And so I don't even really fully know how to answer that question in this moment, because it hasn't been born yet. The new version of me hasn't been born yet. But I will say that I've been, the things that stay true to me, there's always a thread, an essence that weaves together the past with the present and the future self. And I think our birth charts can really speak to that thread. And I still have my daily practices with tarot and astrology. That's something that always is a thread in my life. Yeah, but things are shaping and forming in new ways. And I feel that with my offerings in the world. I also feel it in my relationships with myself and with other people. It just feels like a big evolution time growth. And so gathering with you right now feels really special. We're actually recording on 11/11/22.
That's right.
Yeah, it's kind of like a magical day.
It is. It feels magical.
Yeah. So I don't even know if I fully answered your question, but that's what it brought up for me when you asked it. Yeah.
I love speaking to people when they're in liminal spaces for conversations or for readings. I feel like that's such a rich and fertile place. And it's also interesting because I notice that there are many different responses that are possible when we're in that liminal space. Like sometimes we feel ourselves in that liminal space and yet really exuberantly joyous about being in a liminal space, and then other times it's more confusing or can feel downright sad. But I really it makes me wonder how you've been feeling with those changes. It's very noticeable, Jeff, because I remember the very first time I connected with your work, there was something so, the word that's coming to my mind is you were like it was like fireworks, you know? You were on Instagram, you were on your podcast, like there were all these different ways to enjoy your work. And it felt like this exuberant outward energy. Like there's definitely that Aquarius sun kind of like, you know, gentle invitation, but still you were ubiquitous in a way. And then when you decided or you announced that you were going to pull back from Instagram, I really felt that actually. I found myself, and you know, not surprisingly, during new and full moons, just kind of thinking, oh, what's Jeff doing? And then remembering, oh yeah, you have a podcast. And then I would go to your podcast and listen to your podcast. But it was really interesting to kind of notice your absence because you're such a felt presence, I feel, in my social media feed. And I always receive your work with so much gratitude. So yeah, I guess my question really is around how has it felt to be more in that liminal internal space?
Yeah. So when you're talking about all of that, and it's cool to hear the reflection,
Mm.
and I think you used the word fireworks or something, which is kind of cool. That made me think of, I'm an Aquarius, but my ruling planets are both in Sagittarius. So Saturn and Uranus are in Sag. And when you said fireworks, it made me think of that. And they're in my 11th house.
Cool.
Yeah. So, but in tandem with this kind of Jupiter and Pisces liminal space, we've also had Saturn in Aquarius since 2020. And for me, as an Aquarius rising with Sun in Aquarius, this has been an initiation of Saturn in my life. And so a part of me pulling back from things like social media, there's so many reasons, but some of it is like from a very practical standpoint of me needing to figure out ways to make money to support myself, and noticing that social media can also be an energetic leak at times. And the things that drew me to social media was never the money. It was always the genuine connection to community. And I do think that Saturn can bring with it some sadness too, because it's like, well, I want to be connecting with the community all the time. But at the same time, I also, things that I've been learning while Saturn's been transiting my first house is, how to get health insurance, how to raise a dog, learning what it means to be on my own completely, living in a new city where I have no family here, and feeling the need to have a bigger space to live in to support the work that I'm doing. Like, no longer do I have roommates and these sort of things, and having an office, and like all these like very practical things that I've just been setting up in my life. And I don't really love it. It's not like the most fun energy to be in, but it does feel necessary to have this moment in time for myself. And so I actually, something else that I do regularly in my practices is I make sure that I'm gifting myself sessions with other practitioners to just have support. And I had a reading this week, an Akashic Records reading, and what came through was redefining my definition of commitment. And the things that are coming through is, can I still stay committed to something while also being messy and joyful and radiant? That this kind of Saturnian commitment doesn't have to feel like hard work. And I think that that's something that, I'm always wanting to do, is like look at how our culture, our like capitalist, colonizing, white supremacist culture puts these sort of expectations on us to always be producing and working hard. And so I've been also finding space to take a rest. So when I feel that I need to take a break from podcasting or social media, that's okay for me to do. And that's part of this work. Being someone who is a practitioner of esoteric and occult practices, it doesn't necessarily fit into the mold of what our society tells us we need to do in order to be successful. And it's an intuitive practice, so it's an intuitive approach and process to that. But yeah, I do long to continue to connect to communities in ways that feel healthy. And I also think some of the break from social media was out of a retaliation against the very corporate feel that it has now, with sponsored ads being put in your face at all times. And honestly, every time I get on there, I do end up spending money. And yes, I'm supporting other practitioners and artists and things like that. I choose who I'm following, but it's very Uranus and Taurus, actually. I'm like, oh, I just bought a new breathwork session with this person, or just bought art from this person. So I have to be mindful in my approach to it. And I think that is that whole Saturn Uranus square. that's been taking place. I've just been feeling very personally because I have fixed placements.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
Wow, I really felt that. I hadn't even thought about that, but you're right. There is a way in which it's consistently about, I don't know, like there's almost I've been kind of toying with human design a little bit, and it's interesting to be thinking about how for myself as a generator, I do respond to the stimuli of the environment around me. And so if I'm consistently being sold to, then I'm consistently buying,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just kind of, it makes a lot of sense. And wow, yeah, that's fascinating. I'm curious to hear a little bit, as much or as little you want to share about your journey actually. Like if we zoom out a little bit, and um I'm curious to hear about your path so far, how you came to this space of being an intuitive practitioner. One of the things I love about you is how beautifully you blend your astrological and your tarot practice, and that also I'm aware that you came from a background of yoga, and that you
Mm.
brought this embodiment and ritual piece into your work as well, which, as someone who's joined some of your classes, felt really, I really feel that deeply. I feel that that
Mm.
piece was what really makes your offering like a Jeff offering, you know?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that. I think even before the yoga piece, my mind's kind of going to Scorpio first, and then there's an
Mm.
evolution from Scorpio through Sagittarius to the Capricorn and Aquarius, like that part of the wheel. But part of the Pluto and Scorpio generation, and that placement in my chart is just like I'm still learning what it means, particularly now as the South nodes in Scorpio. But there, my background, like I come from a family that actually, like, as all families, we have our trauma
Mm.
and there's secrets within the family. And, someone as the only person in my family in the Pluto and Scorpio generation, because my brother happens to be in the Pluto and Libra generation, um, I found myself as the one that was kind of like the therapist in the family from a young age, and people would tell me things, and there's things I found out, and like just like holding on to secrets within the family.
Mm.
And secrets within the family create an atmosphere for shame. And if we can't talk about the things underneath the surface, then in our own life, we start to seek out healing for transformation. And so things that I experienced early on in my life that are related to a lot of Scorpio themes led me to being on a path of asking deeper questions.
Mm.
And so I have Pluto and Scorpio in the ninth house, with a Scorpio midheaven. So I have come into more of the conscious awareness of why I've been drawn to practices like tarot and astrology, and it's to offer me vocabulary and healing around the intergenerational trauma that's been passed down through my family. With, I come from a family with a lot of addiction and not talking things through, and in some ways spiritually bypassing through religion and things like that. And so that's like where the journey kind of began for me, and why I was drawn to these practices. But we don't stay in Scorpio forever. Sagittarius comes next. And I actually have more Sagittarius in my chart than Scorpio. And so then that pursuit of leaving home was really strong in me, and moving to New York City. And, I originally moved there for right after I did yoga teacher training in North Carolina. And so yoga teacher training to me feels very Sagittarian. And its approach, it's a practice from another part of the world. It's fiery, you're moving your body, you're chanting, these sort of things. And so I was just drawn to these practices that took me out of the deep well of the Scorpio energy and the things that I had been holding onto for people, keeping other people's secrets and holding space for their trauma when they're not willing to go in there. But that Sagittarius wants to burn through that karma through expanding the horizons of one's world. And so that's what I did. As soon as I did the yoga teacher training, I just moved to New York City, and I kind of think back to that person, and I've really no idea like what I was thinking. I had no plan put in place at all. I just did it. And I did whatever I could do because I knew that environment of living in the South was not supportive for me. And if I had stayed there, I think I would have probably continued to go to the psych ward and continue to be on lorazepam and Klonopins and, just like whatever they can do to like keep me at bay, because I was expansive. I was firework, like, yeah. So and then everything just kind of unlocked when I was in New York, because I got to meet people from around the world that were teaching me other perspectives. My time there felt very Sagittarian, actually.
Wow.
Became a teacher, yoga teacher, tarot teacher. I was just having a really good time while doing it too. And then that eventually turns into, well, how am I going to make a life for myself, Capricorn? So I mean, I could continue to follow the wheel, but I think it's always nice to, and I think this time of year right now, we have a lot. I don't know when you're going to be publishing this episode, but there's a grand water trine right now. And there's a lot of Scorpio placements. There's some asteroid energy in Cancer, and we have the major outer planets. We have Jupiter and then Neptune and Pisces. So I've just been really in this place of reflecting on it all. And, that's why I'm drawn to these practices. I'm becoming more psychologically aware of my own patterns at this time.
Wow.
I'll pause there. I could keep going, but I'm just curious what you might want to say now.
I mean, it's fascinating because I do notice myself being really drawn to a lot of astrologers who either grew up or is based in the South, and who had some sort of tie to some sort of religious upbringing, or at least a backdrop of religious upbringing. And I think it's so fascinating because there's a lot of that religious programming in my upbringing. And it is fascinating to me personally, for me, when I found my Akashic practice, it shifted a lot of things for me, and it kind of brought everything together. And I realized that it is about having this devotional practice and having a relationship, cultivating tools and skills to connect with the numinous. Like this piece around connecting with the numinous felt very present. And I'm just really curious more about that. I'm not really sure if I have questions, but it feels like there's something to explore there. And particularly, I know that your work is, you're deeply called on a heart level to serve and center the LGBTQ plus community. And I think, it's just so cool, Jeff, like over the years, having these people who either come up to me for readings or are in my student container and was telling me about how you were their first ever astrology reader.
Oh, really?
Like, yeah. This
cool.
has been a pattern, actually. At least like 3 or 4 people have come up with that story to me. And so I noticed it, and it's interesting. I'm curious to hear about your current exploration around that, around the, fixed water of the backdrop of our family life and belief systems, and maybe this transition from Scorpio to Sagittarius,
Yeah.
What's coming up for you around the idea of working with family patterns and family trauma, family secrets, and how also, as intuitive practitioners, a lot of us work with like the occult, right? We work with the unseen. And I don't know if you see any connection there, or what comes up for you around that.
I mean, all of this is so watery, these topics. And so I think that this serves as an opportunity for anyone listening to just even look at their chart and see what they have in water placements.
Yeah.
And actually, I, I went, I got a drink with a friend last night, and they're not really into astrology. They actually don't really believe it, which is
Mm.
why I always like hanging out with people like that because keeps me on my toes a little bit. Um, but they were talking about, I don't know how it came up, but we were talking about intergenerational trauma and also
Mm.
like healing family dynamics. I didn't bring it up, they did, but right now, Palace and Black Moon Lilith are conjunct in Cancer, and I'm like, this is so like relatable
Totally.
to this current transit, but I know with this person that I can't use astrology as a vocabulary with them, and that's okay. But in the
Mm-hmm.
back of my mind, I know I'm like, oh, you're always so like cosmically aligned, but
Mm.
you resist the vocabulary around it. Um, they're a Libra, and very logical Libra.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I'm bringing that up because they started sharing this story about a bucket of crabs
Mm.
as a way to explain family dynamics. And of course, I'm like, a bucket of crabs, we're going into Cancer already and we're talking about family dynamics, how appropriate. But essentially, like if a bunch of crabs are in the bucket,
Mm-hmm.
and one crab learns how to start pulling itself out, the other crabs will grab onto them and pull them back down. That there's this sort of like sabotaging that they do to each other, even though they could each probably get out on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about that as a metaphor for like being in a family dynamic and being in these patterns and trying to get out, but getting pulled back into the
Right.
patterns.
Right.
So I'm bringing that image to mind, for us to just consider. But yeah, the watery regions, it's the Cancer energy is, you know, the things that we do in our own family dynamics. And the
Mm.
Scorpio would carry us into our more intimate relationships. And when you're in a relationship with someone sexually, romantically, then you also have that opportunity to project family dynamics onto them.
Mm-hmm.
And then Pisces would be more of the spiritual connection or the psychic love, the collective traumas that we're moving through.
Mm.
And so when there's a lot of planets and water in our chart or in transits, then we have the opportunity to really delve into these topics. And this is why I love astrology so much, is because it's a practice that allows us to connect to all of the themes of life. And I haven't encountered any other practice except maybe the tarot that does this, where
Mm.
we get to acknowledge psychological healing
Mm.
and astrology while at the same time it's practical. There's the earth signs and it inspires us to work and to
Yeah.
make money and to build a life that supports us,
Mm-hmm.
while at the same time it creates dialogue around fire. And so we can talk about things that make us laugh and things that we're creating and what lights us up. And then we have
Yeah.
the air element, which is about the vocabulary that we use
Mm-hmm.
and what it means to be a citizen of a society and contribute in ways that are uplifting other people through our thoughts and ideas and our collaborations. So astrology is just this tool that does not bypass any theme of life. Whereas like growing up in a Christian family, it's kind of like all fire.
Mm.
It's like there's no acknowledgement of the emotion of the abuse in the family. We're bypassing it with fire.
Mm-hmm.
But astrology says, no, we all have an eighth house. We all have
Yeah.
water somewhere in our chart. And so
Mm-hmm.
it is actually a very like holistic lens of viewing the world that we live in.
Mm.
And I think that was always something that for me, as someone with a degree in psychology, I always was kind of missing the magical side of the practice. Or, for someone who's studying business, maybe they're all in earth and needs to learn how to incorporate some fire so that they're getting some joy out of what they're doing.
Right.
But this is I'm kind of like just flowing with the conversation.
Mm-hmm. I love that
right now,
stuff.
with so much in water, there is a lot of opportunity for us to do more of the emotional healing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think also this is a nice segue to what I originally wanted to talk to you about, which is this idea of devotion, because it feels to me that part of what I feel on a felt sense from your work is your ability and your desire to show up in a very devoted way. With your podcast showing up, every new and full moon, and also, yeah, like in your Fool's Journey, for example, there's such a beautiful centering of like really checking in with like all the different ways that we engage with this work, right? It's not just intellectual, it's not just emotional, but there's the spirit part of us, there's the body part of us. And to me, I don't know, I'm really feeling your Virgo moon shining brightly here, that you're really showing up to that craft, and that there's a certain trust of how the craft will carry us through this, whatever it is that we're moving through, right? Be that the fiery or the watery realm. I'm curious to hear, in your journey now, you've been doing this for a while, what have you learned about kind of the waxing and waning of our relationship to our practice and the role of ritual and devotion? What's coming up for you around that? Mm-hmm.
Well, you sent me a list of like really deep questions to prepare for this conversation, and one of them was around this idea of devotion. What does devotion mean to me?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, wow, this could be an essay. Like, this is such like a great question. And so I found myself like, they were actually all felt like tarot prompts. So I actually pulled cards for all the questions that you sent me, just to
I love that.
Spark some dialogue within myself.
Yeah.
And for the question, what does devotion mean to me? I pulled the Knight of Pentacles, which felt pretty right on for me. And I think, you were highlighting my Virgo moon, and the Knight of Pentacles I usually associate with Capricorn. I also have Venus in Capricorn. But yeah, there is this devotion to me is the coming together of body, mind, and spirit through some sort of intentional effort, some sort of directed focus. And there does feel like devotion, it's like earthy and fiery at the same time. Like there's a sense of passion, like one's passion and love for this planet that we live on, and putting in work towards that passion. So there's sort of this like conscious awareness of being a spiritual being, having a human experience. I think is also present with devotion. And it's once we have that conscious awareness of being a spiritual being here on this planet, then we can no longer deny that. And so if we're engaging with something that is not honoring the spiritual side of ourselves, then for me, I've always felt like I might implode. And so when I began to become more conscious of spirit, everything that I do now is a devotion, taking care of my body every day. And so when I'm saying the coming together of body, mind, and spirit, it's a devotional practice to tend to my body every day. And sometimes that's a fiery practice. Sometimes that's restorative, depending on what my needs are. And so the devotion's always there, but it's changing. So finding ways to consistently direct that awareness, that conscious awareness towards whatever it is that I am creating to also help other people be on this planet and to heal. And it feels like devotion also feels like an act of gratitude for this experience that we have, towards this human experience, an act of gratitude towards spirit, our force spirit. And so I do consider myself and my work to be very devotional. And so getting the Knight of Pentacles is highlighting the work, but it doesn't have to be work. I also, we often use the word devotional for Virgo, I think. But I think all 12 astrological signs hold the potential to be devotional. And I think even meditating on that word devotion through the lens of each of the 12 signs can show the many different ways that devotion might come forward. We can be devotional to ourself, Aries, and I do have Vesta and Aries in my chart. And Vesta, the asteroid, could be another place we look in our chart to give us some vocabulary and insight into devotion in our life, for sure. And Vesta, now that I think about it, is both fiery and earthy, which we were talking about. There's something in devotion that is both tending to the earth realm while also having some sort of fire behind it too. And that's Vesta, is hearth and home.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your relationship with Vesta these days?
Well, interesting. You should ask because Vesta's in Aquarius right on my sun. Yeah. That only happens every 4.5 years.
Uh-huh.
So Saturn and Vesta have been hanging out in Aquarius the past few months, and Saturn and Vesta are, I think Vesta's like at the same degree as my sun today. So
Wow.
I am developing a relationship to that archetype. Lighting candles is like just a simple act of devotion that we can do every day
Mm-hmm.
to recenter ourselves. And, that candle holds space. And I think this is Vestal. How does the energy of your room shift when you light a candle? It can help focus the energy. It creates a sense of reverence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, but Vesta is also sexual too. It's a side that we don't really talk about with Vesta too often. And Vesta has this sense of, I think of Vesta as also being athletic. I think of someone that has, I believe they have the sun conjunct Vesta in their birth chart is Serena Williams.
Oh, wow.
And I think of like holding the torch as like a symbol of Vesta, like the keeper of the flame. And so someone that is devoting their body to spirit. So like Olympic athletes have that kind of Vesta feel, like just to give us like a way to connect in with it. But someone who's waking up at sunrise and going to the gym, that's also Vestal.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be so connected to the home. It could be the body as the home. But treating the body as a temple is like kind of that Vestal principle, but also treating the mind as one too. So for someone that has like Vesta and an air sign, it might be more mental. For someone with Vesta and a fire sign, it might be more like athletic. But
I love that. I feel like what you're bringing forth here is the idea that, devotion is expansive, and also, devotion as a pathway to, like honoring the fact that we are here as humans and that we're also spirits, and what does it mean to connect the body and the spirit, and maybe devotion is the act of connecting the two, because there's the part of us that's the spirit part, and then there's the part of us that's the body part, and they're not always in congruence, but they can always have a communication. Yeah. I feel like this idea of devotion is activating too. Like there's something you were mentioning about the fiery part of devotion, and I think even this was part of my experience in being in your Fool's Journey cohort this year, which was fashioned or kind of facilitated as a self-guided journey this year, or like we were all kind of in our own pilgrimage, that there is a resistance to it, that especially when we are not in, we are in community, but maybe we don't see the people who we're in community with, there can be a sense of resistance, towards showing up each week. So I'm curious to hear, in your practice, how have you worked with that? Because, our practice, both publicly and personally, are always subject to this like waxing and waning, right? There are times when we feel really connected to it and we really want to show up. And then other times when we're like, I'm kind of done with this. Yeah.
Yeah. When you say this, are you referring to like an astrology practice or to the devotional practices, or?
For me personally, I feel like sometimes in my own astrology learning journey, I continue to experience like being put in that spiral, right? Where like, just when I look back, it's very obvious that periods of stasis and frustration always lead to deeper understanding,
Mhm.
But it is a matter of working through those periods, because when those periods come, you don't know that you're going to break through, you know?
Mhm.
I don't know if that's also part of your experience.
Yeah. I mean, I've gone through periods where I've had to take breaks from
Mm,
certain practices.
mm-hmm,
And I think that that's also like devotion does not have to be the same every day.
mm,
And trusting and listening to your intuition and what your body needs or what spirit needs in a given moment, I think is
mm.
important. I think that there
Yeah.
might be, um, there's no right or wrong way to be devotional. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you're putting yourself in a box of showing up every day to the same practice, there are benefits to that. I've experienced that and kind of pushing through that resistance.
Yeah.
Um, if you decide that you want to commit to like a physical yoga practice for 30 days, there's going to be days that you don't want to show up to that practice for sure.
Mm.
But at the end of the practice, you will likely feel a sense of relief and accomplishment through that.
Yeah.
And so, I think devotional practices you can challenge yourself sometimes, like what would it be like? Who am I if I decide I want to do a year of sobriety as a
Mm.
devotional practice?
Mm.
There's going to be likely a lot of resistance around that for some people, and others
Totally.
it might come more easily. And so just kind of noting, what a commitment or a practice brings up for you helps you to get more clear on who you are and what your truth is. And
Mm.
so for some people, doing a self-guided fool's journey could feel really easeful and flowing. And for others, it might feel like a chore.
Mm-hmm.
And really sitting with that and saying, well, maybe devotional practices are less about my own journey and more about the community aspect of it. And so
Mm.
I'm devotional in community with other people. And so it's all a learning opportunity, I think, when we're engaging in different devotional practices to see which ones resonate the most with us. And also, they can change throughout our lifetime. There have been times where I really need to be in spiritual community with other people. There's
Mm.
also times where I'm like, now's a time where I really need to be on my own.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I love that reframing around what I was really feeling as you were speaking was to give ourselves the permission to see how we want to be devoted at a particular moment in our lives, because as you mentioned earlier, there can be a shift in how we want to show up in devotion, and that part of that has to do with attuning as well to what's present at the moment. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't always align necessarily with our logical mind, and I think maybe that's part of the challenge, that
Yeah.
we have this idea that devotion has to be prescribed, but
Mhm.
maybe it's not the case.
And being gentle with the process, I think, is so important.
Mm.
That if you're not feeling like you want to be devotional at all, then take some time off.
Yeah.
You deserve it.
Yeah.
We all do.
Mm-hmm.
And that your very act of existence is a devotional act. Or can
Mm-hmm.
be.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm curious if anything's coming up for you around specifically astrology and tarot, and how they can help us cultivate, deepen our sense of what it means to work with devotion. Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Yeah, you asked me this question, I think, too, beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
So let me remind myself what card I pulled here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So how can astrology and tarot assist us in cultivating and deepening a sense of devotion in our spiritual practice?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these are all such great questions for us to be reflecting on. I pulled the Five of Pentacles, which shows I'm using the Modern Witch Tarot.
Mm.
which shows two people in coats like bundled up in the freezing snow, and they're outside of a church or sanctuary. So I was like, this is an interesting card to receive here. But how can astrology and tarot assist us in our devotion, our spiritual practices? And I'm getting this one, and I'm seeing these people outside of a church. So it reminds me that astrology and tarot are places of belonging for marginalized communities. And they are practices that I think transcend religious doctrine in many ways. I mean, there are some many religious symbols like baked into the tarot and even astrology, but we as a collective have been empowering ourselves to upgrade the archetypes so that they, I mean, this is the modern witch tarot, but also there's a lot of queer decks that are being created right now. And I have found that the people that I work with tarot and astrology are, often part of marginalized communities, not always, but it doesn't deny anyone a seat at the table. They're tools for connecting to spirit, regardless of what your spiritual beliefs are. We could have completely different spiritual beliefs, but we can still talk about life through these tools. And I think that that's so unique as a practice, both astrology and tarot, that it really doesn't matter what your worldview is or your religious views are. These are practices that can bring us together to have further dialogue. We're likely going to resonate with the people that share similar worldviews as us when they're using this tool. But I think that that's also something just important to remember too, is that just because someone's practicing astrology doesn't mean that they share a similar vision of the future as you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do. There's something in this card though. Like when I saw that, it's like, this is what's been really important to me, is someone who never felt accepted by the religion that I grew up with. And both astrology and tarot offered me a place to connect to spirit that wasn't dictated by some doctrine,
Yes.
Yeah. So it's given me permission to find a way to channel my devotional nature and to trust in my own power to do so, and to create rituals that are in alignment with me. I think they do inspire us to have our own personal connection to the divine.
Yeah. As you're speaking, I'm just kind of marveling at the flexibility of, tools and practices like tarot and astrology, because there's something about them that is so open, and I think it's fascinating because this is something that's come up in my teaching container quite a bit, around the idea of centering the spirit of astrology, thinking about when we survey the history of astrology and how astrology in the West, has its ups and downs, how it went in vogue and then was out of trend or was maybe banned from being used by people, how there's also in the shifting, the transformation of the significations, right, of the planets or the signs or the houses, that the spirit of astrology also has agency and intelligence, right? And the same thing with tarot. In the evolution of these practices, they actually reflect back to us our concerns as humans in that moment. And I think that's really cool, and there's space for that, Yeah.
Yeah. I love the way that you word that. And it's always really cool to just see cards as they're evolving throughout time. The one that's coming to mind right now is the Strength card, which its earliest depiction shows a man that's like beating a lion with a club. And it's evolved into this much more peaceful union between animal and human. And the Lover's card also too has evolved a lot, and now I think a lot of the modern depictions show someone looking at themselves in the mirror.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. I love that. I remember reading this because the strength card, as you know, is one that I'm deeply connected with for myself. And I'm going to read you back something that I read from the Fool's Journey, actually from that gorgeous document that you shared with us. You wrote, "It's here that we learn to drop into the heart, honoring our emotion and intuition with tenderness and compassion. Strength connects us to our inner child, to our beloved pets, and to the discipline of adult responsibility. Strength reminds us that our emotions, sexuality, and creativity are not something to be ashamed, afraid, or guilty of, but rather when we can really be present with whatever emotion or desire is arising, without judgment, we find ourselves cradling our soul's calling." That just,
I read that.
Yeah, I got really emotional just reading that because it feels so pertinent. And it's interesting, Jeff. I feel like throughout this conversation, we've been traversing different archetypes, but I'm seeing that the pattern that's emerging is kind of this wildness of our soul's calling and how to honor that. How devotion is really a vehicle for us to honor our truth, which is ever evolving, but also is whole and intact in its form, and in how, like the isness of our truth is not something that we necessarily always see the whole picture, but it's a felt sense,
Yeah. It's exciting. I'm getting excited for us in the new year. I think that there's things shifting into some fire signs from all this water.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah. Something I also want to bring into the conversation is I noticed that being in your container and having learned from you in various formats, you always have this beautiful way of marrying the like the ritual aspect as well as the intellectual studies, and kind of doing a very comprehensive survey that's not overwhelming. It's how I would put it. It feels really exciting. Like, for example, you were sharing about this evolution of this, how the strength card is depicted, and there's a way in which you share that feels really relatable and grounded and grounding. And I'm curious to hear, as someone who has experience, more intuitive training, and then also, deepened my studies in something like tarot or astrology, sometimes I feel like a lot of the materials to learn these systems, these models of existence, right, like tarot and astrology, can feel so intellectual and brainy. But that's not the problem in and of itself, right? The problem is that there's maybe like there's a lack of connection between that intellectual side and maybe more feeling it in our being, And I'm curious to hear what roles have ritual and also these deeper intellectual studies played in your own journey as well as the journey of your students.
I'm sensing so much of Pisces coming through with this question. And I appreciate that as someone with Mercury in Pisces, Jupiter in Pisces, that we could maybe look at astrology as Aquarian. It offers us an objective perspective, which we can recognize patterns and get to know energy and vibrations and things like that. While Pisces is what's behind the veil. And Pisces connects us to more of that feeling state that I think you're you're tapping into this the spirit of it all.
Yeah.
And so intellectual studies help attune us to that truth of spirit. Without Aquarius, we cannot bring voice and name the Piscean truths of the unknown. And so even tarot at times can feel quite Aquarian to me too. Think of Pamela Coleman Smith as an Aquarius. A lot of Aquarian, like the Fifth Spirit Tarot is created by Charlie Burgess, and is also an Aquarius. I think Aquarians are attuned to archetypes because they're a language that brings about more of a collective awareness. Pisces is also interested in this too, as the collective water sign. But maybe Aquarius is more of that attunement to the intellectual side. And so intellectual studies help to attune us to truth so that we can recognize and perceive the patterns. And they help offer us vocabulary so we can begin to attempt to bring voice to the mystical unknown. Yeah. Which is impossible to do. But at the same time, we can strive for that. And so this helps us in our own life and also in relationship to others. But there's a balance. I mean, it's like intellectual studies can also block us off from deepening our connection to the unknown at the same time, where, before I decide if I want to take this trip, I'm looking at all the transits to make sure it all lines up. And it's like, actually, what if you just let go and surrender to the unknown and let it flow? Right. So there's a balance with it always. We can start to compartmentalize our trauma. Yeah. Instead of actually feeling something when it's sad. It's like someone passes away and then all of a sudden you're looking at their charts to see, oh my gosh, what was Pluto is transiting their sun. And now I'm studying this person's life and the passing of them instead of actually feeling the grief of them passing. Yeah. So there can be like over intellectualization that these practices create. And so it is always important to remind us to be pulled in by that desire to communicate about the unknown while also allowing ourselves to experience it too. I love that. We don't have to know all the answers, and that we don't actually know all the answers. None of us do. We can never know. Yeah. Yeah. It's important to check myself always as a teacher, is to remind people of that. Yeah. Yeah. I think you do that so beautifully in your classes. And I think there's also a balance, right? That as facilitators, we can step into of like, yeah, we can know these things, using tools like tarot and astrology, and also we'll never know the entirety of reality despite studying all the time, I think you were bringing forth some really interesting points around that's kind of, this is a conversation that I've had in my community recently around how astrology can become this really powerful buffer, and also tarot, between us and the directness or kind of the rawness of our experience, right? And that part of what's so incredible about astrology is that astrology helps us project our experiences onto some other thing that, whether that's a sign or the planets or our chart, to then be able to assess, the situation with maybe more distance, which hopefully then gives more clarity. But as you mentioned, it's also the challenge in working with modalities like this is that there are times when maybe the most healing thing is just to cry. Right? The most healing thing is just to feel the largeness of our emotions and not to run away. Not that astrology is running away, but that not to use the practices to hide from the rawness of our human experience. And also something that I've been thinking a lot about for myself too is that I've sometimes experienced
this, obsessive desire to learn is often correlated for me personally as a Gemini moon to not wanting to be in the gnarliness of the human experience. Like, I'd rather just continue studying because that's easy and I'm good at it, rather than like really be in the rawness of that. So, thank you for bringing that point forward.
And life will present you opportunities where you start to realize that you have to learn other things than intellectual pursuits.
Yeah.
Like maybe a relationship starts to deteriorate because you haven't allowed yourself to fully be present emotionally in that relationship. And there's times where we start to learn that we can't always be intellectualizing, and we have to feel. And when you're talking about the rawness, or I think you said like the rawness of this human experience, I think you said something like that. It's reminding me of the Strength card. And it's reminding me of Leo as a polar sign to Aquarius, what would it feel like for us to sit down and talk with each other and not have astrology and tarot as a buffer to the conversation, and not to already have in the Rolodex of my Aquarian Virgo moon brain that you're Pisces with a Gemini moon and a Virgo rising, like I know your chart.
Yes.
How might I experience our interaction if I allowed all of that to just dissolve? And I think that Leo does teach Aquarius that kind of rawness and that presence of being just primal with whatever's coming up in this moment.
Wow.
That yes, I'm offering Aquarian truth saying, oh, Jupiter's in Pisces for the next 2 months. But if you don't feel that going on in your life, then let it go. And there's times in your life where that might serve you. And so I'm very aware that, even my offering, sometimes people tap into it when they need it. But also like to live in that Aquarian cosmic cousins bubble at all times isn't always helpful too. It is my offering as an Aquarius, but I'm going to a comedy show this week with a friend.
Yeah.
And I need to do those things.
Right.
To balance myself. Right. So that's some of the Leo coming in. But yeah, I'm always curious about that, of how we can engage with each other in ways that might be maybe a little bit more playful and less intellectual. I think it would be fun at some point in our life to get together and play like a board game instead of talking astrology, and just see like what that feels like,
Totally. Yeah. Or simply, just, I don't know, go to a restaurant, whenever you're in Brooklyn, and then we try a new cuisine and we just talk about that, But I think this is a really interesting conversation to me at this moment, at least. I've been recently meeting up more IRL with people that I've met through this community, and it's so fascinating, like what happens when we meet in person, because there is kind of a period of adjustment of like, wow, you have legs, you are actually a human being, especially because for me, a lot of my community members that I've become really good friends with over the past couple of years have happened during the pandemic, and we haven't had a chance to get to know each other in real life. But that, then there's a different way. Like what I'm noticing is that there's a different way that we talk about these practices, these mystical traditions when we're face to face. When we're in the context of, I don't know, getting dinner, right? Really loud music and talking about Leo. Like it's different than this more clinical, sterile format of Zoom, It's
been a very Aquarian few years, having Saturn in Aquarius.
Totally.
And I think that and Jupiter was in Aquarius too. I think we'll be feeling some shifts, and we'll look back this time and be like, whoa, we were all talking over Zoom that whole time Saturn was in Aquarius.
Yes.
But that's also felt appropriate, I think, with everything going on collectively.
Totally.
But also Pluto enters Aquarius next year.
Mm-hmm.
So we're also in this energy for the next 20 to 25 years of Pluto and Aquarius too. So, and maybe the conversations will get even more in depth with it being Pluto and the sign of Aquarius.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Saturn will move into Pisces in March. And so there will be shifting energies, and maybe there will be less Zoom calls.
Maybe.
At that time,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it feels very Aquarian. Like when you're saying like the sterile environment. I mean, we love Aquarius, but it also can be a sterile energy, I think.
Definitely.
Too. It's scientific and distant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But that expands our heart too.
Yeah.
Now I can have a conversation with someone intimately that lives in Brooklyn while I'm in Portland. Like it is humanitarian.
Yeah.
And we're connected around the globe now.
Yeah. Exactly. Mm.
Yeah.
I feel like that brings us to a nice point, or a nice transition point into, I'm curious, we're talking now, as you mentioned, today's 11/11/2022. And, we're wrapping up the year. And just on a felt sense, I really feel the wrapping up of the year this year. And I feel, you also had mentioned that we are kind of moving away from this more water energy, maybe into the fiery energy. And, the holiday season is always kind of a portal, right? Like a lot of us have to go through the holiday season. Many of us who are in the LGBTQ community have to work with the complexity, of everything that the holiday season is bringing forward. So I'm curious if you have any guidance, whether that's maybe through the astrology or through tarot, that you want to share.
For people that might be going to see family over the holidays.
Yeah, and also I think, the end of the year is intense in general, right? Because we've created this construct where, okay, the year is ending. What did I do in 2022? Or maybe for some others, it's the exact opposite experience where it's like, wow, so much has shifted, and like I don't even know who I am anymore.
Yeah. Well, for me, something that I always come back to if I choose to visit family, particularly during the holidays, is noticing my tendencies towards overcompensating, and also shifting who I am to fit the needs of other people, so that there's just ease. And so like maybe I take that earring out, or maybe I wear long sleeves to cover up the tattoos, that, and just kind of noticing the ways that you might deny yourself to create ease, and trusting that you can show up fully as yourself, and you owe that to yourself to show up embodied as the person that you are and evolving to be, and to be proud of yourself for exactly who you are. You are enough in this moment. There's no amount of like gifts that you can bring home or accolades that will ever be enough sometimes for family. And so, for people who are more airy, having affirmations like I am enough, and like coming back home to that affirmation, I think could be really great. Having people that you can connect in with that reflect back to you your truth can be really helpful. Maybe even just like setting up a buddy that you're like, hey, I'm going to be going home by myself. I don't have anyone with me, and I just need to check in with someone.
Yeah.
That's something that we could do. These are all things that I've done, bring certain stones home with me that One of them is chistolite, which is a stone that I think it's petrified wood, and it has a cross on it. It's supposed to dispel like judgment of Christianity. And I've taken it home with me every time I've gone home. So those who are more earthy, it might actually be like having like talisman, physical things that we can carry that remind us of these things.
I love that suggestion.
I mean, there's a lot that you could do. You could also set really clear boundaries and not go home and be with your chosen family. And that's
True.
okay too. And if you're choosing to do that, I do think it's important to communicate that so that can, so passive aggressive tendencies don't come forward.
Yeah.
Of like, do you not love us anymore? Or like whatever it is, and just say, no, I really need to take care of myself right now. It's been a rough few years. And if I choose to come home to visit you right now, I won't have the money I need to take care of myself and go on a vacation this year, which I really deserve. I don't know. There's so many ways that I don't know what scenarios we're moving through, but I'm kind of talking from a personal experience. I'm not going home to see family at all. And I'm giving myself permission to not feel guilty because of that, but that I really need to take care of myself first.
Yeah.
Jupiter enters Aries on the winter solstice this year. And so there is this, we're at the end of some epic cycle with Jupiter and Pisces, and we're starting for good the new cycle. Jupiter entered Aries earlier this year, but there is a shift into the individual path right at the solstice this year. And we start with the Capricorn new moon there in the first few days of Capricorn season 2. Yeah, those are just some like little fun tips for engaging with family. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for that. As we wind to a close, I feel like I can talk with you forever, Jeff, and maybe we will. But I'm curious to hear if you have any offerings you're excited about that you want to share with folks, how people can find you, and yeah.
My offering that is of service to the community and as a free offering is I'm continuing to release podcast episodes on the new and the full moon. And so that's something that is always there for you, for your own ritual and just connection. And I plan to always have something that is available to all people, regardless of income and things like that. That's important to me. And so that's still there. My work is shifting a bit, and I'm primarily doing one-on-one work. I have shifted from holding space in community groups to one-on-one because I have a desire to go really deep with people, like clients and students who are wanting to deepen their connection to tools like astrology and tarot through a trauma-informed approach and through somatic practices to bring about greater psychological healing, spiritual healing through these practices. So I've offered one-on-one mentorships for the last year that are 6 months, but I am opening up space for 1 and 2 year commitments with people one-on-one. I'm just feeling that's how my practice is evolving. And it's an honor and a joy for me to connect with people in this in-depth way, and everyone's coming with their own unique needs. I work with people who are therapists themselves and are wanting to bring astrology and tarot into their practice. I work with creatives who are working on films and maybe are dancers and incorporating archetypes into their practice. Work with people who want to be astrologers themselves. There's so many different ways that you can work with these tools. And so and then I also am planning on in the new year releasing more specific offerings to navigate larger transits. Like I know I'm going to be releasing a workshop download on Saturn and Pisces, and that will include tarot spreads and meditations and different practices to help those who might be coming up on their Saturn return, or for those who have Sun, Moon, or Rising in Pisces. And this will definitely be an initiation for those folks who have a lot of Piscean energy over the next few years, as Saturn's in Pisces with Neptune in Pisces.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I will be having other offerings coming out too. If the one-on-one work doesn't call to you at this time, there will still be like little workshops and things that I'll be releasing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. I have one last question for you, which is, the name of this project is Healing the Spirit, and I'm curious to hear what's coming up for you when you hear that phrase, healing the spirit, with regards to anything really, any visuals that come up, any memories, any advice, challenges, limitations you perceive, anything.
What came through is a visual that I had this experience too. I used to work at a yoga retreat center as the trash man, the composter. That's when I launched the podcast. I was living in Hawaii for a year, and I did a permaculture program. And one of the people that I met when I was living there, her job in the retreat center was to gather all the flowers and to make bouquets and make kind of like mandala altars in different places. And she would make leis, and she was working with the flowers all day. So that image came through when you said the name of the podcast. And I think it's because she's very devotional. She's actually a Virgo with an Aries moon. And before we started recording, we were kind of started talking about Virgo and Aries a little bit. But there's that like kind of fiery devotion that she had when she was doing it, but it was still very Virgoan. And she would sing while she was gathering the flowers all day. And so I shadowed her one day, and she was like, this is part of my process. I sing all day when I'm gathering the flowers. And so one of the songs that she taught me came through when you said the name of the podcast. And I won't sing the whole song, but the phrase that came through was, healing our body, mind, and spirit, spirit of the water, come wash over our hearts. And it felt like it wanted to come through in song when I connect to the name and the vibration of the podcast. So I'm curious, do you incorporate your music and song into the podcast?
I do. I wrote the theme music for the podcast.
I thought so.
Yeah.
But I'll think we would all love to hear you sing more too.
Yeah. I've been deep in this really interesting period, and I feel myself coming out of it. Maybe also with this, Jupiter actually entering Aries. I've spent the past couple years really working on my voice on a very technical level, but I think it's really I'm starting to feel it wanting to like be applied, into like material, and to start writing songs again. It's been interesting because writing songs have been not coming through with the pandemic, and I think it's probably because I've been writing songs. I usually write songs on the go. I write on the subway. I write when I'm walking, and there's less of that. Like there's more just kind of sitting down, in the past couple of years.
I'm the same way. I haven't written any songs in the last few years.
I'd love to hear some of your songs.
I'm curious what Saturn and Pisces is going to bring us.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be on my sun, so that's going to be really interesting too, and on my ascendant ruler. So let's see.
It feels like there could be obstacles around music, but also when you're talking about materializing, like actually like releasing something like an album, or that also feels like Saturn and Pisces.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but I love the music to the podcast. It
Thank you.
immediately puts you at ease.
Mm, mm,
And I think that that's also what it brings up for me. Healing the spirit does make me want to sing.
mm. I love that. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, it
I
does.
really love that. It feels like such a gift to be in conversation with you and to hear you sing. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's it for my conversation with Jeff. Thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation, that you perhaps received something from it or learned something from it, or you found something helpful. It was truly a joy and a privilege to be connected with Jeff. And if you resonate with their voice, I would encourage you to find Jeff's podcast, Cosmic Cousins, or to also check out their offerings. Maybe work with them one-on-one, or sign up for one of their self-guided workshops, which are always amazing, and there's so much great content. I always feel so blessed in working with Jeff's offerings. So all of the links will be on the show notes below. And if you have been enjoying Healing the Spirit, if you have been enjoying this episode, I would love it if you could leave a review. I believe the only platform that allows written review at this point is Apple Podcasts. So if you could find this podcast on Apple Podcasts and leave a review there, that would be super helpful in helping other people find this podcast. Truly, it doesn't have to be long. Like literally the review can be 1 or 2 sentences, and that's totally sufficient. I mean, if you want to leave a longer review, I am totally welcoming that, but it's not necessary, because really the point is to encourage others to listen to this podcast and to perhaps enjoy the conversations, enjoy the transmissions that I'm sharing. And my hope is that it will serve you in one form or another. Thank you again for being here. I am excited for the next time that we get to connect, whenever that may be. And until then, I am sending you so much love, and I thank you for listening.